Hello guys, how are you? This is the first chapter that I'm going to talk about from your textbook. And the first chapter is pretty much the overview of what is going on for the rest of semester. Of course, we will not talk about everything that your textbook, we talk about half of your textbook, the first half. And then this covers all of the textbook. But anyhow, let's go and quickly mention a few things. Okay, I guess my thingy is stopped. Okay, so application of this course, if you would, these are from me. You're learning a new language, so it increases your vocabulary. A lot of you want to go to medical school, pharmacy school, dental school, you're a biology major. So you need to learn a new vocabulary and you have to memorize, I would say, a lot of terminologies. So this class will introduce you to some of that. You learn a different language, as I talked about it. You learn daily, ordinary information that is thrown at you, like the information is in the news, like cancer. Right now we have coronavirus, the greenhouse effect, and so on and so forth. A lot of things you will learn that somebody who did not have this class probably do not know as much detail as you learn in this class. Evolution, that's another thing. Viruses and bacteria, as I said, coronavirus right now putting us in pandemic. So you will learn some of these things from a different angle. You probably learn something about cancer, your family member, God forbid, had cancer. But what you are going to learn here is not necessarily despite that, but it's just you're learning it from a different view, if you will. And then, of course, finally, I would like to emphasize that the information you receive here, you must practice it. You must go over it and over it and over it until it sinks in. And then that way you learn the information. I had a professor in Kentucky. He said, if you cannot recall the information, you have not learned it. So make sure you can recall the information. If you can recall the information, then you learned it. And of course, then, after that, you can answer the questions in the exam. Or MCAT, you're planning to take DAT for dental school or PharmCAT, whatever you're planning to do. Then ask questions. What do biologists do? They should ask questions. They develop a hypothesis and then use their hypothesis to predict something and then test it and repeat the test and so on and so forth. So these are some of the things biologists will do. And no matter what profession you get into, I guess you have to develop this mentality. They call it scientific thinking, and I hope you learned that this semester a little bit about scientific thinking. What happened in the past, I used to bring, let me grab it, if you don't mind. I used to bring a piece of paper like this, and I asked students to cut it in half and cut that in half in a classroom, and cut this in half and cut that in half and pass it to another student and cut it in half and in half and in half. And eventually the paper, as you know, it would get that small, okay? And then some students very bravely, they cut that in half. And another student came and said, yeah, I can cut this. Okay, cut it in half. Okay, right here, I guess you guys can see that. And then another student said, yeah, I can cut this half. And this took half an hour to cut it half, but I kept talking. So, but anyhow, let's assume that one student like me give up and say, I cannot cut this in half anymore. But there is technology available that can cut that piece of paper in half and cut that piece of paper in half and cut that piece of paper in half and half and half. And eventually when everything is cut in half, what do you guys think we get into? We get into atoms, okay? Atoms are the ones that make up molecules, okay? For example, this happened to be a chlorophyll molecule, and these are, each one of these circles is an atom. These are an atom, okay? So an atom is also, it can be broken down apart to different parts. Well, atoms make up molecules, molecules make up organelles, and in this case, it's a chloroplast. You learn all of them, mitochondria, chloroplast, nucleus, Golgi apparatus, you learn them all. And then organelles can make up a cell. This is a cell. And then cells can make up tissues. Similar cells that have almost same functions, they can perform the same functions, they make up tissues when you combine them together. And then when you combine several tissues together, they form an organ, okay? Or organ system, they call it. Like your heart is an organ. Your brain and your spinal cord is an organ. Your liver is an organ, okay? It's a combination of tissues, and tissues are made up of cells, different type of cells, okay? And then finally, the organs combined together, they make up a living organism like you. You're made up of your brain, you're made up of your liver, your skin, your bones, your muscles, and that's what you are. You are an organism. And then organisms together, they make up a population. This is the best definition of population you're going to get anywhere. A population is a group of organisms, as I mentioned it, a group of organisms that they can breed among themselves. And when they make offsprings, those babies are similar to their parent, okay? And then those offspring can also multiply. That's the definition of a population. So we have different population. We have in your homes, you have population of rats, mice in my home. In my home, I have population of mice and rats. And then of course I have a population of human, my wife and my kids. And my kids in my home cannot reproduce, but when they get older and they leave my home, they can also reproduce, okay? So what happens is a communities, so it's an interaction of two or more population. It's called a community. So all organisms that are assembly of a different species living in close together to interact with each other is a community. And then ecosystem is the interaction of biotic, which are living organisms, and abiotic, non-living organisms. So you have an ecosystem of Lake Tahoe that is the organisms, populations of organisms, they are interacting with the environment. So that's a definition of an ecosystem. And then of course, Mother Earth is an interaction of all of the community, all of the ecosystems, I'm sorry. All of the ecosystems on planet Earth is called the biosphere, or I call it Mother Earth. Okay, there are two types of, let's tackle another subject. There are two types of cells. One of them are eukaryotic cells. The eukaryotic cells, they do have nucleus, and prokaryotic cells, they do not have nucleus. But they both have chromosomes, cytoplasm, cell membrane. Those are the primary main structures they have. You know, the DNA make up the protein molecules and so on and so forth. So here's a structure of a bacteria and an eukaryote right here, and a prokaryote. Oops, sorry, better move that out of the way. But anyhow, let's put it here. And a prokaryote, which is right here. Oh, I lost. Sorry about that. I lost my point, my highlighter. I would like to have my pen. Okay, I have it back. Great. So, and of course the size, eukaryotic cells are bigger than prokaryotic cells. Okay, I'm sorry about this getting in the way then. Prokaryotic cells. Okay. Of course, we human, you know, are a combination of, I'm not sure if you get into detail, when we get to zoology, we'll talk about this a little bit more in detail. Sperm and egg are combined together. That egg cell, fertilized egg cell, is called zygote. Okay, and then zygote becomes a bunch of cells, which becomes morula and blastula, gastrula, and eventually 9 months later, a human is born. That's the life cycle of human. An organism's genome is the entire set of genetic instructions that is genetic instructions. Genomic, that's what the name of this course is, molecular cell biology and genomics. Genomics is the study of sets of genes within and between species. Genes are blueprint of proteins, and we'll talk about those. That's a very important concept. We all spend almost half of semester on that. The genes dictate what protein molecules to be built. Genes are not protein. Genes are DNA, made up of DNA molecules, which we'll talk about that. Proteomics is the study of whole sets of proteins encoded by the genome, known as proteomes. And then we will not talk about that too much in this class, but there are classes in big universities you can take. Here is an animation, if I can.
This simple animation illustrates the principle of negative feedback, or feedback inhibition, in the regulation of a chemical reaction sequence in a cell. The sequence involves 4 molecules, A, B, C, and D. 3 different enzymes catalyze the conversion of one molecule to the next. The final product, D, inhibits the first enzyme in the sequence. When the concentration of D rises to a certain point, the reaction shuts itself down.
Okay, this example, you guys, she was talking about a metabolic pathway, but negative feedback, we have them all over in biological system. The best analogy, it's just not necessarily in a metabolic pathway that the enzymes precede. Yes, that's one aspect of it. The other aspect of it, like the hormones in your body, insulin is secreted, it brings the sugar level down, and then when sugar level in your bloodstream goes down, then another hormone is secreted, which is glucagon. So that is an example of like calcium. There are hormones involved with level of calcium in your blood. So examples of negative feedback is all over in biological system. But one example, one analogy maybe you can relate with is the thermostat at your home. If you set your thermostat on 80 degree, what happens during summertime, when the temperature reaches 80 degree, it stops, okay? That is a negative feedback. It tells the system, tells the thermostat to stop. So I hope you have a better understanding of a negative feedback, what is going on. Do we have positive feedback? Yes, of course we have positive feedback. Yeah, I'll let you watch this and then I come up with an analogy.
In positive feedback, a product of the reaction sequence enhances the action of one of the enzymes, increasing the rate of production of the product. Positive feedback is less common than negative feedback in living systems.
That's right. There is less positive feedback in biological setting than negative feedback. An example of that you can relate to is in positive feedback is avalanche. So when there is a little snowball starts rolling, it becomes bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. So what happens? One set of chemical reaction in your body occurs, and then escalate others, and it becomes bigger and bigger and bigger. One example of that is when a woman goes to labor, the amount of oxytocin is released, and it becomes greater and greater. Contractions becomes greater and greater. Oxytocin level in the blood goes up higher and higher and higher, and eventually the birth will occur. That's one example of it. The other example, we have a few of them, again, not as common as negative feedback, but another example of positive feedback, it is your blood clotting. So when you cut your finger, a whole bunch of molecules starts making up, one reaction occurs to another one, another one, another one, and then you have these coagulation factors at the cut. Okay, approximately 1.5 million species have been discovered on planet Earth, about 2 million, and there are mathematical models that these numbers, that could be anywhere between 10 to 100 million. Here is a species that we have, all of the species. If you want to name them, you should find a scientific name, that what a scientific name means. If you go to Japan and you say Homo sapiens, they know what you're talking about. Okay, so Homo sapiens is a scientific name for human all over the earth. Other countries, they call human something else. Here in the United States, we call it man, woman, human. Of course, that's not a universal language. So Homo sapien, the scientific name is universal language, no matter which country you go to. And then of course there is classification, like we have, I'm making an analogy again, we have 7 continents, okay? And in each continent there are countries, in each country there are cities, in each city there are, in each country there are states or provinces. In each state you have cities, you have then streets and so on and so forth. And finally, the bottom line right here is your house, okay? So that would be like the continent and the level of taxonomy, or I should write down the word here. Okay, the level of, these are the levels of taxonomy. The levels of taxonomy, of course, kingdom. Well, we have domain before kingdom, and when you get to zoology, we complicated a little bit more for you guys. So, but for now that you recognize it's a domain, and from domain is kingdom, and then in each kingdom you have several phyla, and each phyla can be divided to subphylum, and each phylum is broken down to class and subclasses, and sometimes superclasses, and then classes divided to orders, and then orders, families, and genera. Singular of that is genus. Genera is plural, and phyla is plural, and phylum is singular. And then, of course, you have species, which this rundown, it gives you a few examples, it gives you not a few examples of the breakdown of human. Organisms are divided into 3 domains, as I said a little bit earlier, bacteria, archaea, and eukaryote. So these are the 3 domains, okay? And then the bacteria, the domain bacteria and domain archaea composed of prokaryotes. Prokaryotes, remember, they were the cells without the nucleus. And then, of course, the domain eukarya, right here, you have kingdom Plantae, kingdom Fungi, kingdom Protista, and kingdom Animalia, which we human belong to right here. We belong to kingdom Animalia. And then there is a lab. I'm hoping you guys do it properly. You have representative from all of these 3 domains and 4 kingdom. Okay, before Carlos Linnaeus, the scientific names did not exist. People were crazy. Well, I'm not sure, I should not say that, that's not right. But the naming system was all over. And he came and he said, well, let's start organizing this a little bit better. So each scientific name, species, have 2 names, genus and species. So, and then he broke them down to kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, and species. So King Paul came over. If you guys want to memorize it, it's hard to memorize this in order. You should know it in order. When you go to botany and zoology, you should know this. King Paul came over for good sex. So that's easy to, I hope, memorize. So, and then it could be exam or quiz questions. And the scientific name are 2 names, as I said, Homo sapiens, capital H and small s, and gorilla is a scientific name for gorilla, capital G, small g. You can underline it or you can italicize it. When you write with pen or pencil, you cannot italicize, okay? You must underline. So for this course, of course, you're typing, you should underline. And then sometimes, or italicize, either one, I will take it. What happens with some species have 3 names? These are called subspecies. So these are subspecies of species Trypanosoma brucei. And then sometimes when in a writing you want to refer, or a scientist want to refer to all 3 of them, they write down Trypanosoma sp. It means they're talking about all 3 of them. And then gorilla, first time you spell it, second time you can write it like this, capital G dot gorilla, or italicized gorilla. Trichomonas vaginalis, as you know, so you can write down Trichomonas vaginalis. It's a protista that is sexually transmitted, and then of course capital T dot vaginalis capital T. And phylogeny is based on homology, not analogy. And Robert Whittaker, what he proposed, I talk about all of those in zoology if you take it later on. So a little bit of evolution published the natural selections, the origin of species. Charles Darwin, he published the origin of species by means of natural selection in 1859. And I'll talk about it again in zoology in greater detail. So I'm not gonna spend too much time in here. These are Darwin's observations and then inferences that he made based on his observations. Again, we'll try to hit this hard in Bio 1. You don't have to worry about it so much. And then of course, the difference between what Darwin and Lamarck mentioned, Lamarck was talking about each individual, Darwin was talking about population. So if a bird feeds on the animals that they can be seen easily, so what happens, these animals are pretty much are gonna go extinct, are gonna become less. And then what happens, the more dark, more tanned animals are gonna be left. And that's what Darwin was talking about, natural selection. Okay, the next thing are the observations. These are, your textbook is giving you some examples of the observations, what happens, and then you ask your questions and you come up with hypotheses and so on and so forth. So, you know, again, I'm not too crazy about these things. It's good that you should know a little bit about these things, study them, how science works, and then what we do. That is important, of course, as I talked about it in the lab. What is a theory? Of course, the difference between theory and hypothesis would be good to know. All right, I am done with the first, if you would, recording. And then I try to keep each chapter under 1 hour. And this one definitely was under 1 hour.